my younger sister, the golden child, started spreading rumors that I am a, and then told our parents that I used when I moved out and planned a wedding. They wrote to me. Let me set the stage. I'm Amanda, and when I was 20, my family decided to go on a beach vacation. Sounds great, right? Sand, sun, and relaxation. But there was a catch, a big one. My dad decided to invite his new wife, Linda, and her daughter, Tessa, along for the trip. I wish I could say we were one big happy family, but we weren't. Not even close. Tessa, 3 years younger than me at 17, and I have never really gotten along. She was the kind of person who always had to have the last word, and I've never been good at keeping my mouth shut either. Let's just say the room we had to share on that trip might as well have been a powder keg. When we arrived at the hotel, I already felt the tension. My mom wasn't on the trip. She and Dad split when I was 12, and things have been complicated ever since. Now Linda was stepping into the role of stepmom extraordinaire, which meant catering to Tessa and leaving me out in the cold. The room situation didn't help. Our dad and Linda got a nice suite overlooking the ocean, while Tessa and I were shoved into a tiny room with 2 twin beds. It was claustrophobic, to say the least. The moment we walked in, Tessa claimed the bed by the window without even asking, threw her suitcase on it, and started scrolling through her phone. No, hey. No, what do you think? Just pure entitlement. I bit my tongue. The last thing I wanted was to start this vacation off with a fight. The first 2 days were tolerable. We'd spend the mornings on the beach as a group, then scatter for lunch and whatever activities we wanted. I mostly stuck to myself. Tessa, of course, found a clique of teenagers by the pool and acted like I didn't exist. Fine by me. The real trouble started on the 3rd night. Tessa borrowed my hairbrush without asking and left it full of her blonde hair. I saw red. It was such a small thing, but it felt like the last straw in a week of little slights. Could you not use my stuff without asking? I snapped. She didn't even look up from her phone. It's just a hairbrush. Chill out. It's my hairbrush. You have your own. Oh my God, Amanda. Why are you always so uptight? She said, finally looking up. Her tone was dripping with condescension. I'm uptight? Maybe I wouldn't be if you showed a shred of respect. It spiraled from there. Voices were raised. Words were exchanged, ugly ones. Tessa called me a control freak. I called her spoiled. By the end of it, I stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me. When I came back an hour later, she was already asleep, earbuds in, completely unbothered. The next morning, she acted like I wasn't even there. I tried to make small talk, if only to keep things from getting awkward in front of Dad and Linda, but Tessa shut me down with one-word answers or flat-out silence. She barely looked at me. At breakfast, I spilled a bit of coffee reaching for the sugar. Tessa, can you pass me a napkin? I asked. She didn't even flinch. It was like I hadn't spoken at all. I repeated myself, louder this time, and still nothing. Linda noticed and handed me one instead, shooting me a look like I was the problem. It got worse as the day went on. At lunch, I asked if she wanted to split an appetizer. Silence. At the pool, I pointed out a cute guy she'd been staring at. Nothing. It wasn't just ignoring me, it was erasing me. By the end of the day, I was livid. What's your problem? I finally confronted her in our room. You're acting like I don't exist. She didn't even pause while applying her mascara. Maybe you should take the hint. That night at dinner, I decided I wasn't going to let her ruin the trip. I was quiet but polite, trying to stay civil. Dad noticed something was off and asked what was going on between us. Nothing, Tessa said quickly, plastering on an innocent smile. Seriously? I shot back. You've been ignoring me all day. Dad frowned. Tessa, is that true? She shrugged. I didn't realize it was such a big deal. I couldn't believe her. She was playing it off like I was the crazy one. You've been giving me the silent treatment since last night, I said. All because I asked you not to use my stuff. Linda jumped in then, her tone all sugary sweet. Girls, it's a vacation. Let's not make this a thing. But it is a thing, I insisted. She's been freezing me out. Maybe if you weren't so confrontational, Tessa muttered under her breath. Dad raised his voice then, which was rare. Enough. Both of you. I don't want to hear another word about this. That shut us up, but it didn't solve anything. If anything, it made the atmosphere even tenser. I could tell Dad was annoyed with both of us, but it felt like I was the one being blamed for the whole situation. By the end of the week, things had reached a boiling point. Every little thing Tessa did seemed designed to provoke me. She'd leave wet towels on my bed, hog the bathroom, and talk loudly on the phone late at night while I was trying to sleep. I tried to let it slide, but it was like she was daring me to snap. And then, on the last day, she crossed a line. We were packing up to leave, and I couldn't find my necklace, a simple silver chain with a little pendant Mom had given me for my birthday. I searched everywhere. My suitcase, the bathroom, even under the beds. Nothing. Have you seen my necklace? I asked Tessa. She didn't even look up from her phone. Nope. I kept searching, growing more frantic. Are you sure? It was on the dresser this morning. She finally glanced up, her expression bored. Maybe you shouldn't leave your stuff lying around. It hit me then. She had it. I just knew. Give it back, I said, my voice shaking. She rolled her eyes. I don't have your stupid necklace. Yes, you do. I saw you looking at it yesterday. So what? That doesn't mean I took it. I felt like I was going to explode. Tessa, if you don't give it back right now. Girls. Dad's voice cut through the tension. He was standing in the doorway, looking furious. What's going on now? She stole my necklace, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. Tessa gasped like I just accused her of murder. I did not. Linda appeared behind Dad, her face a mask of concern. Amanda, I'm sure there's an explanation. Let's not jump to conclusions. But I wasn't backing down. She's been messing with me all week. I know she took it. The room was dead silent for a moment, and then Tessa stood up, her face flushed with anger. You know what, Amanda? I'm done with you. You're pathetic. After that disastrous vacation, I hoped things would settle down, but they didn't. If anything, they got worse. Tessa didn't just ignore me anymore. She went on the offensive. What I didn't know was just how far she was willing to go, or how much damage she could do. It started subtly, the way these things always do. When I came home from college for a weekend visit, I noticed my dad and Linda acting strange around me. They weren't outright rude, but there was this tension in the air, like they were waiting for me to confess to something. Dad was always a little distant since the divorce, but this was different. He barely looked me in the eye, and Linda's usual forced friendliness was gone entirely. I didn't think much of it at first, until it became impossible to ignore. One morning, while I was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through my phone, Linda walked in with a tight smile and sat across from me. She had this look on her face, like she was preparing for an argument. So, Amanda, she began, her voice overly casual. How's school? Fine, I said, sensing there was more to this conversation. Why? She hesitated, glancing at her coffee mug. It's just, your father and I have been hearing some things. About your lifestyle. I frowned, completely confused. What things? She sighed dramatically, like she was bearing the weight of the world. Tessa mentioned that you've been struggling a bit. She's worried about you. Tessa? I almost laughed. What exactly did she say? Linda leaned in, her expression growing serious. Amanda, if you're in trouble, you can tell us. We want to help. I'm not in trouble, I said firmly. What is this about? That's when Dad walked in, holding his mug of black coffee. He stood by the counter, not even sitting down, and said, Tessa told us you've been experimenting with drugs. I stared at him, stunned. What? She said you've been using, Amanda, Linda said softly. And, well, there was something else. Something about how you've been paying for it. My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Dad finally looked at me, his face hard. She said you're working as an escort. Is it true? For a moment, I couldn't even speak. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the room. You think I'm a drug-addicted escort? I finally managed, my voice rising with disbelief. No one's accusing you, Linda said quickly, though her tone was anything but supportive. We just want to understand what's going on. Nothing is going on. I practically shouted. Where the hell is Tessa getting this from? Dad crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. She wouldn't make something like this up, Amanda. She's worried about you. Worried? I laughed bitterly. She's lying to you. She's been out to get me ever since that vacation. You can't seriously believe this. Linda shook her head. Amanda, you need to calm down. We're not attacking you. But if you're hiding something— I'm not hiding anything. I interrupted. This is insane. But they didn't believe me. I could see it in their faces. The doubt, the mistrust. It was already there, poisoning the air between us. Tessa had gotten to them, and they were eating up her lies like they were gospel. That night, I confronted her. She was sitting in her room, scrolling through TikTok like she didn't have a care in the world. I barged in without knocking, slamming the door behind me. What the hell is your problem? I demanded. She looked up, startled, then smirked. Wow, rude much. Don't play dumb, Tessa. You told Dad and Linda I'm a drug addict? That I'm working as an escort? She shrugged, completely unfazed. I didn't say you were. I said it's what I've heard. Heard from who? Yourself? I snapped. Relax, Amanda. If it's not true, then you have nothing to worry about. I wanted to scream. Why are you doing this? What did I ever do to you? Her smirk widened. You exist. That was it. That was all she said before turning back to her phone, dismissing me like I was nothing. I stood there, shaking with rage, but there was nothing I could do. If I yelled, if I fought back, it would just make me look guilty. And Tessa knew it. The next few weeks were hell. Dad and Linda started keeping their distance, treating me like a stranger in my own home. Every time I came back from school, it felt like I was walking into a minefield. They'd ask pointed questions about my friends, my classes, my job at the coffee shop, always looking for cracks in my story, for evidence that Tessa's lies were true. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Linda was whispering, but I could hear the worry in her voice. What if she's in over her head, Rick? What if she's too scared to ask for help? I don't know, Dad said. She's not the same kid she used to be. Maybe we missed something. I wanted to march in there and scream at them, to tell them how blind they were. But what was the point? They'd already made up their minds. Tessa had poisoned the well, and there was no coming back from it. Things came to a head when Linda found a bottle of ibuprofen in my backpack and freaked out. She stormed into my room, waving it in my face like it was heroin. What is this, Amanda? She demanded. It's ibuprofen, I said, incredulous. For headaches. Are you sure? She asked, her voice dripping with suspicion. Of course I'm sure. Read the label. But she wouldn't let it go. She accused me of lying, of hiding drugs in plain sight. It didn't matter that the bottle was perfectly normal. She'd already decided I was guilty. I called her out in front of Dad, hoping he'd back me up, but he just stood there, looking uncomfortable. Linda's just worried, he said weakly. You can't blame her for wanting to protect you. Protect me? I shouted. She's accusing me of being a drug addict because of Tessa's lies. Let's not bring Tessa into this, Linda said quickly. This isn't about her. This is about you. I couldn't take it anymore. You know what? Forget it. Believe whatever you want. I'm done. I packed my things that night and left, slamming the door behind me. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Not with them treating me like a criminal. Not with Tessa smirking at me every chance she got. I stayed with a friend from college for a while, trying to figure out what to do next. The worst part wasn't the lies. It wasn't even the way Dad and Linda believed them. It was the way Tessa won. She didn't just ruin my relationship with my family. She took away my sense of safety, my trust, and she did it all with a smile on her face. After weeks of tension and countless accusations, I thought things couldn't possibly get worse. I was wrong. Tessa was relentless, and my dad was so blinded by her manipulations that he couldn't see the damage he was doing. Everything came to a head one night, and it was a night I'll never forget. I'd been staying at the house for a few days after my finals were over. I hadn't wanted to, but Dad had insisted. It's your home too, he'd said, though it hadn't felt like home in a long time. Every moment there was suffocating. Tessa was in her element, parading around like she owned the place, and Linda made it clear with her chilly politeness that I wasn't welcome. One evening, I decided to escape the house for a while. I called up Mia, an old friend from high school, and we met at a coffee shop downtown. We hadn't seen each other in years, so we spent hours catching up, laughing about the ridiculous things we used to do and sharing updates about our lives. It was the first time in weeks I'd felt like myself. When I got back to the house, it was late, almost midnight. The lights in the living room were still on, which was unusual. I stepped inside and immediately felt something was off. Dad was sitting on the couch, his face grim. Linda was perched in the armchair, her arms crossed, and Tessa was on the love seat, looking like the cat that ate the canary. "Amanda," Dad said, his tone sharp. "We need to talk." I froze, my heart sinking. "About what? Where were you tonight?" Linda asked, her voice dripping with suspicion. "I went out with a friend," I said cautiously. "Mia, you remember her?" Tessa scoffed. "Sure you did. What's that supposed to mean?" I snapped. "I saw you, Amanda," she said, her eyes gleaming with fake concern. "I saw you with a man." I blinked, completely thrown. "What? No, you didn't." "Yes, I did," she insisted. "You were at the corner of Elm and Pine. I drove by with Ashley. You were all over him." "That's a lie," I said, my voice rising. "I was with Mia the whole time." Linda frowned. "Tessa wouldn't make something like this up." "Oh, wouldn't she?" I shot back. "She's been lying about me for weeks, and you've been eating it up." "Enough," Dad shouted, slamming his hand on the coffee table. "Amanda, I want the truth. I am telling the truth." I cried. "Tessa is lying, like she always does." "Then why would she say she saw you if she didn't?" Linda asked. "Because she wants to ruin me," I shouted, my frustration boiling over. "She's been doing it since that vacation. She can't stand me, and now she's trying to turn you against me." "She doesn't need to," Dad said coldly. "You're doing a good enough job of that yourself." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You're really going to believe her over me?" "She's never lied to me," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "But you? I don't even know who you are anymore." That broke me. "You don't know who I am because you've never tried to," I said, my voice trembling. "You've let her poison you against me, and you didn't even question it. You just assumed the worst." "I don't need to assume," he said. "Your actions speak for themselves." "What actions?" I cried. "I haven't done anything." "Tessa saw you," Linda said, as if that settled it. "And honestly, after everything else we've heard—" "You mean the lies you've heard?" I snapped. "You know what?" Dad said, standing up. "I've had enough of this. You're tearing this family apart, Amanda." "I'm tearing it apart?" I said, incredulous. "Tessa's the one lying, and you're letting her get away with it." "You don't belong here anymore," he said, his voice ice-cold. "Pack your things and leave." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "You're kicking me out?" "I don't have a choice," he said. "You've made it impossible for us to trust you." I looked at Linda, hoping for some kind of support, but she just looked away. "And Tessa?" She was smirking, her eyes glittering with triumph. She'd won, and she knew it. "Fine," I said, my voice shaking. "If that's what you want, I'll go. But don't come crying to me when you realize what she's really like." I stormed upstairs, my hands trembling as I threw my belongings into a suitcase. Every part of me wanted to scream, to cry, to punch something. But I wouldn't give Tessa the satisfaction. I wouldn't let her see me break. As I dragged my suitcase down the stairs, Tessa was waiting in the hallway. "Tough break," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Go to hell," I spat. She just laughed. "Already there, sis." I walked out the door without looking back. The night was cold, and the air stung my skin, but I didn't care. I was done. Done with the lies, the betrayal, the constant battle for a family that didn't want me. When I walked out of my dad's house that night, dragging my suitcase behind me, I had no plan. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there anymore. Tessa had made sure of that, and Dad and Linda's willingness to believe her lies was the final straw. I needed to start over, to build a life where I wasn't constantly fighting to prove my worth. But starting over is easier said than done. That night, I crashed on my best friend Mia's couch. She lived in a cramped studio apartment downtown, barely big enough for one person, let alone two. But she didn't hesitate to let me in. "You can stay as long as you need to," she said, handing me a blanket. "Thanks, Mia," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't know what I'd do without you." She gave me a sad smile. "You don't have to do this alone, Amanda. I've got your back." Those words meant more to me than she probably realized. For the first time in weeks, I felt like someone was in my corner. The next morning, reality hit hard. I didn't have a job, and my savings were barely enough to cover a month's rent anywhere, let alone in the city. I spent the day sending out job applications, scrolling through Craigslist for apartments, and trying not to break down every time I thought about what had happened. Mia was a godsend. She worked as a bartender, so she spent most of her nights at the bar and her mornings sleeping in. That gave me plenty of time to figure things out without feeling like I was in the way. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to feel guilty about taking up space in her tiny apartment. One afternoon, while Mia was at work, I got a call from an old acquaintance, Rachel. We hadn't talked much since high school, but she'd seen my desperate post on Facebook about needing a place to stay. "Hey, Amanda," she said. "I heard you're looking for an apartment. My roommate just moved out, and I need someone to split the rent with. Interested?" My heart leapt. "Yes, definitely. When can I see it?" Rachel gave me the address, and I was there within an hour. The apartment was nothing fancy. A small two-bedroom in an older building, but it was clean, and the rent was reasonable. I moved in 2 days later. That first night in my new place felt surreal. The silence was deafening, and for a moment, I questioned if I'd made the right decision. But as I unpacked my things and arranged them in my tiny bedroom, I started to feel a sense of ownership over my life that I hadn't felt in years. The next hurdle was finding a job. I'd applied to dozens of places, but no one was biting. My savings were dwindling, and I knew I couldn't keep relying on Mia and Rachel for support. Desperation led me to accept a job at a local diner as a waitress. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. The first few weeks were brutal. The shifts were long, the customers were demanding, and the pay barely covered my rent. But I threw myself into it, determined to prove to myself that I could make it on my own. My manager, a gruff but fair man named Joe, seemed to notice my effort. "You're a hard worker, Amanda," he said one night as I was cleaning up after my shift. "If you keep it up, there's room to move up here." "Thanks, Joe," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "I appreciate it." It wasn't much, but it was the first time in a long time that someone believed in me. Despite the progress I was making, the pain of what happened with my family lingered. I couldn't stop replaying that night in my head, wondering if there was something I could have said or done differently. The betrayal cut deep, and the realization that I no longer had a home to go back to was hard to accept. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, I came home to find Rachel sitting on the couch with a bottle of wine. "Tough day?" she asked, pouring me a glass. "You have no idea," I said, collapsing onto the couch. Rachel handed me the glass and studied me for a moment. "You never talk about your family," she said. "What happened?" I hesitated. I hadn't told anyone the full story, not even Mia, but something about Rachel's tone made me feel safe. "They kicked me out," I said finally. "My stepsister lied about me, and my dad believed her. He said I was ruining the family." Rachel's eyes widened. "What did she lie about?" I hesitated again, the words catching in my throat. "She told them I was a drug addict and working as an escort." Rachel's jaw dropped. "What the hell? Why would she do that?" "Because she hates me," I said, the bitterness in my voice surprising even myself. "And my dad, he just took her word for it. He didn't even give me a chance to defend myself." Rachel shook her head. "That's messed up. You deserve better." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so much time feeling like I was the problem, like I wasn't good enough. Hearing someone say otherwise was like a bomb on an open wound. As the weeks turned into months, I started to find my footing. The diner job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I started saving up, little by little, and even managed to buy a second-hand bike to get around the city. Rachel and I became close, and her friendship was a lifeline during those tough early days. One day, as I was biking home from work, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled over to check it and saw a text from Mia. Guess who just got promoted to assistant manager? It read, followed by a string of celebratory emojis. I couldn't help but smile. Despite everything, life was moving forward, not just for me, but for the people I cared about. It was a small reminder that there was still good in the world, even when it felt like everything was falling apart. Eventually, I decided to cut all ties with my family. I blocked their numbers, unfriended them on social media, and stopped checking in with mutual acquaintances. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. Every time I thought about reaching out, I remembered the look on my dad's face when he told me to leave. That kind of betrayal doesn't just go away. 6 years had passed since I'd walked out of my dad's house, leaving behind the family that had betrayed me. A lot can change in 6 years. I'd built a life for myself, one that was messy and imperfect but entirely mine. I wasn't the scared, desperate girl who left with nothing but a suitcase and a shattered sense of self. I'd grown stronger, though the scars of what happened hadn't faded completely. I hadn't heard from Tessa, Dad, or Linda in all that time, and that was by design. Cutting ties was the only way I could heal, though the weight of their betrayal still lingered in the quiet moments when I let myself think about them. But I was getting better at not thinking about them. Then, out of the blue, everything came rushing back. It started with a message request on Facebook. I almost didn't check it. After years of dealing with spam and random creeps, I'd learned to ignore those notifications. But something about the name caught my eye, Jacob Adams. The name stirred a vague memory, but I couldn't place it right away. Curious, I opened the message. Hi, Amanda. You don't know me, but I feel like I owe you an apology. I'm Jacob, Tessa's ex-boyfriend. I know this is random, but I need to tell you something about her. Something you deserve to know. Can we talk? My heart skipped a beat. Tessa. I hadn't heard her name in years, but just seeing it made my stomach churn. I debated ignoring the message, deleting it, and pretending it didn't exist. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the mention of an apology, or maybe it was the curiosity that had always gotten me into trouble. Either way, I replied. What do you want, Jacob? The response came almost immediately. This is going to sound insane, but I need to explain something about what happened between you and your family. Can I call you? I hesitated. This felt like a bad idea, but my curiosity won out. Against my better judgment, I sent him my number. A minute later, my phone buzzed, and I picked up. Hello? Amanda? His voice was hesitant, almost nervous. This is Amanda. What do you want? I'm sorry for just dropping this on you, he said quickly, but I've been carrying this around for a while, and I can't keep it to myself anymore. It's about Tessa. What about her? I asked, my voice cold. He took a deep breath. She lied. About everything. I froze. What are you talking about? The stuff she told your dad and Linda. The drugs, the escort thing. It was all a lie. She admitted it to me a few years ago. My mind raced, a mix of anger and disbelief flooding through me. She admitted it? Yeah, he said, his voice heavy with regret. We were together for a couple of years, and one night we got into a huge fight. She said she was jealous of you, that she felt like you always got more attention. So she made up those lies to get rid of you. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. She told you that? Yeah. She thought I'd find it funny or something. But it was messed up. I didn't know what to do with it back then, but now I feel like I need to tell you. You deserve to know. I was silent for a long moment, trying to process what I just heard. Why now? Why are you telling me this now? I broke up with her a while ago, and I've been thinking a lot about the kind of person I want to be, he said. I know I can't fix what she did, but I thought maybe this would give you some closure. Closure? I laughed bitterly. Do you have any idea what she took from me? I can't imagine, he admitted, but I'm sorry. I really am. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, my voice trembling with anger. She ruined my relationship with my dad. She destroyed my life. And you just sat on this for years? I didn't know how to tell you, he said weakly. I didn't even know if you'd want to hear it. Well, thanks for nothing, Jacob. I snapped, hanging up. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. My emotions were a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and a strange kind of vindication. Tessa had admitted it. She confessed to ruining my life out of petty jealousy. It didn't change what had happened, but it felt like a piece of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the call. Jacob's words replayed in my head, dredging up memories I tried so hard to bury. I thought about reaching out to my dad, but every time I picked up the phone, I couldn't go through with it. What would I even say? Would he believe me? Or would he find a way to twist it, to make it my fault again? Instead, I threw myself into work. I was managing a small bookstore by then, a job I loved because it let me be surrounded by stories that weren't my own. But even the comforting smell of books couldn't distract me from the storm brewing inside me. One evening, after closing up the shop, I found myself scrolling through Facebook again. Against my better judgment, I clicked on Tessa's profile. Her life looked perfect. Photos of vacations, fancy dinners, and a new boyfriend who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. It made me sick. Without thinking, I sent her a message. "You lied about me. I know the truth." I didn't expect a response, but a few minutes later, my phone buzzed. "I don't know what you're talking about," she wrote. "Jacob told me everything," I replied. "You were jealous, so you ruined my life. Admit it." There was a long pause before she responded. "You're pathetic, Amanda." Still stuck in the past. Her words ignited something in me. "I might be stuck in the past," I wrote back, "but at least I'm not a liar." She didn't reply, and I didn't push it. I knew better than to expect an apology. Tessa would never admit what she'd done. Not to me. But I didn't need her to. I had the truth now, and that was enough. Over the next few weeks, I started to feel a sense of closure I hadn't thought was possible. Jacob's call, as painful as it was, had given me something I'd been missing for years: validation. For so long, I'd blamed myself for what happened, wondering if I could have done something differently. But now I knew the truth, and it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. Over the years, I'd learned that peace often came at the price of cutting out people who only brought chaos into my life. After Jacob's revelation, I thought about reaching out to my dad, about confronting him with the truth, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Too much had been said, and too much trust had been broken. Reconnecting felt like opening a door I'd worked too hard to close. So I didn't. I let the silence linger. That didn't mean the past stayed in the past. A few months after Jacob's call, I got another message, this time from Dad. It was short, almost terse, like he'd agonized over every word. "Amanda, I need to tell you I'm sorry. I know now I was wrong. I should have believed you. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time, my emotions swirling. For years, I dreamed of hearing those words, of having my dad acknowledge the pain he'd caused me. But now that the apology was here, it felt hollow. Too little, too late. How could I trust someone who had so easily turned his back on me? Still, I couldn't ignore him entirely. I responded, "I appreciate the apology, Dad, but I'm not ready to talk yet." He tried again a week later, sending a longer message explaining how he'd come to realize the truth about Tessa's lies. Apparently, Jacob had reached out to him as well, and while he didn't go into detail, he admitted that hearing it from someone else had opened his eyes. "I was blind," he wrote, "and I'm ashamed of how I treated you. Please, let me make it right." I didn't respond. By the time I met Zach, my now husband, I'd started to feel like my life was truly my own. We met through mutual friends at a housewarming party, and I was immediately drawn to his easy laugh and steady demeanor. He wasn't the kind of man who swept you off your feet with grand gestures. Instead, he made you feel grounded, like you'd found solid ground after years of treading water. Our relationship grew slowly, built on trust and mutual respect. For the first time, I was with someone who didn't make me feel like I had to prove myself or earn their love. Zach loved me for who I was, scars and all. When he proposed, it was intimate and perfect. We were sitting on the couch in our little apartment, eating takeout and watching an old rom-com. He pulled out a ring box and simply said, "Amanda, I love you. Will you marry me?" No cameras, no crowd, just us. And it was everything I'd ever wanted. Planning the wedding was a whirlwind of joy and stress, but one decision was easy. Tessa wasn't invited. I didn't even have to think about it. There was no way I was letting her toxic presence ruin the happiest day of my life. When Dad found out, he called me immediately. I didn't pick up, so he left a voicemail. "Amanda, this isn't right," he said, his tone a mix of anger and pleading. "Tessa is your sister. You can't just exclude her like this. She's family." I didn't respond. The next day, he called again. "If Tessa isn't invited, I won't come either," he said. "I can't support this kind of division in our family." That stung, but I didn't cave. I called him back and told him firmly, "This is my wedding, Dad. If you can't respect my decision, then don't come." He tried to argue, saying that weddings were about bringing families together, not driving them apart. But I stood my ground. "Tessa and I haven't been family in a long time," I said. "And that's her doing, not mine." In the end, he didn't come. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, but as I walked down the aisle, seeing Zach waiting for me with tears in his eyes, I knew I'd made the right choice. My wedding day was perfect, not because it was flawless, but because it was filled with love and peace. And for once, there was no drama to overshadow it. A year after the wedding, I got another call, this time from Linda. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Amanda," she said, her voice strained, "I don't know if you've heard, but Tessa is in the hospital. She tried to hurt herself." My heart sank. For all the pain Tessa had caused me, I didn't want her to suffer like that. "What happened?" "She's been struggling with substance abuse," Linda said. "She checked herself into rehab a few weeks ago, but she had a relapse. Rick and I thought you should know." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, unsure of what else to say. "We were hoping," Linda hesitated, and I knew what was coming. "We were hoping you might reach out to her. She could really use her sister right now." "I'm not sure that's a good idea," I said carefully. "Tessa and I haven't spoken in years." "I know," Linda said, "but this could be a chance to start fresh, to heal." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. For a brief moment, I considered it. Maybe this was a chance to mend things, to finally put the past behind us. But then I remembered all the nights I cried myself to sleep, the years I spent rebuilding my life after she tore it apart. I'd fought too hard for my peace to let her back in. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I can't do that." Linda sighed, disappointment clear in her voice. "I understand," she said, though it was obvious she didn't. "But if you change your mind—" "I won't," I said gently but firmly. "I hope she gets the help she needs." After I hung up, I felt a pang of guilt, but it didn't last long. Tessa's problems weren't mine to fix. I'd spent too much of my life trying to clean up other people's messes, and I wasn't going to do it anymore. Now, years later, my life feels like a completely different chapter. Zach and I bought a little house in the suburbs, and we're expecting our first child, a girl. When I think about the family I'm building, I feel a sense of hope I never thought I'd have. My past doesn't define me anymore. It's a part of my story, but it's not the whole story. I still think about my dad sometimes, about whether he regrets the choices he made. But I don't dwell on it. I've made my peace with the fact that some relationships can't be fixed. And that's okay. Tessa's fate is her own to decide. As for me, I've chosen happiness, love, and a life free from the toxicity that once held me back. And for the first time in a long time, I feel free.